slightly down in numbers, but that's all right. The faithful few. Um, so I'll read. This isn't really. I mean, it's related, but it's not related. I don't know. This is Psalm 2, and I'll just let us think about this for a little bit. Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds them in derision. Then he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury, saying, as for me, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. I will tell of the decree. The Lord said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron, and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Now therefore, O kings, be wise. Be warned, O rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear, and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and you perish in the way, for his wrath is quickly kindled. Blessed are all who take refuge in him. I read this earlier this week, and it's an interesting announcement from God that it's, because on one side of it, we see this and ask the question, why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers take counsel against the Lord and his anointed. We see that happening, whether in large scale or just in small scale. And for us, it's, there's this fear or this, worry that comes from it or whatever. But the response from God is, he who sits in the heavens laughs. He holds them in derision. So it's like God is saying, this is not an issue to me. I'm God. They aren't. And then it's that warning of, if they don't understand who I am and do what I ask, that is, therefore, O kings, be wise, be warned, O rulers of the earth, serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. If they don't, then God will become angry, and his wrath will be quickly kindled against that. Now, in one regard, that's good, because that means God will bring down the wicked. But it also means that in his wrath, there is if it's kind of a generalized wrath against us, if you will, Christians will be in the midst of that. But the Christians don't look at it and say, "Oh, God is going to damn me to hell for this." No, we know our eternity is secure. And so it's to realize in those moments to say to others, hey, all these things that we see that are happening around us, death, decay, destruction, violence, war, famine, poverty, all those negative things, all those effects of sin, all those things that are punishment in a sense, that is to lead us to realize God is going to do something about it. He's going to bring all that to an end. And he's already promised that and shown that to us in Jesus Christ. And when Christ returns, he's going to end all of it. The ascension that we celebrated last week says the same thing about these, is that God is going to put all the rulers and dominions and powers under Christ's feet. They're already there. We just haven't seen that happen yet. So anyways, I read that this week, and I thought it might be kind of pertinent to what we're talking about, because in our topics, these are really the kings and the rulers of the world coming up with their own concepts of how justice should work and how the people should be, and it totally is against what God has ordained.
Right. Well, you don't have fear for God. You don't have fear for anything. I mean,
correct.
If you lose that,
yeah,
you're
absolutely right. So, anyways, that was Psalm 2. And with that, let's open with prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, you are ascended, and you rule and reign from on high to all eternity. And And you promise that at the end of all time you will bring your kingdom and welcome us into it to enjoy the everlasting peace that you have given and that you've won by your death on the cross and resurrection from the tomb. We ask that you bless our time together to hear your word and to recognize those powers and principalities of this world, those things that are evil, that are set against you and God, that we might discern them and be able to act against them, and that we would be able to use your word to tell others of the grace and mercy that you've shown to us, that they would repent and trust in the forgiveness and join us in that eternal kingdom. All these things we ask in your holy name, for you live and reign with the Father and the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. Okay, so it has been 4 weeks, I think, since we were last together. So we'll do a somewhat quick recap. The progression of this class so far is we've been talking about the kind of the atmosphere of the culture right now, and specifically brought up the example of the sign. And I found it's actually like 6 houses down. I thought it was just like right here on this block, but it's farther down. The sign's still up, and realize that those statements, as they're making a positive statement, they're declaring something, they're saying something over against something else. Well, what underlies that? And that's what we've been kind of moving towards. And so we had to back up and say, okay, where's this underlying thought of really creating a division, creating a separation, comes from someplace. And the place that we can trace that back to begins with what we call classical Marxism, which was the economic and social theory produced by Karl Marx. It falls under that concept of conflict theory, and it is in which, for him particularly, it was economic in the 2 classes, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, or the haves and the have-nots, might be the easier way. And his concept was, eventually, if you got enough of the people, of the have-nots, to realize where they were and what was going on, they would revolt against those who have, and then it would kind of redistribute and be equal among them, and we would achieve a utopia. Okay? In that, these were the means. So the end was the utopia, and the means for that, for Marx, was revolution. Particularly violent revolution, actually rising up, pitchforks, torches, all those things, guns, and overthrowing those who were controlling, so that then everything could be equal. And when we talked about this, we talked about how that's really in opposition to God's word. One, it doesn't account for God at all. It's a complete system that is, from beginning to end, that is without God or any sort of religion. Marx was against religion in general, particularly the Christian religion. And so where I was going with that. Why these? And then we realize also that these things that are that he was presenting are against what God commands. We talked about the 10 Commandments. This idea of, when God gives the command, "You shall not steal," the implication in that is you have property and another person has property, and I'm entrusting those things to you, because all gifts come from God. All possessions that we have come from Him, and so He's entrusting that to us to be good stewards of that. Well, if we submit ourselves, or if people submits ourselves to saying, well, that's not actually how God works, but it's there's going to be some other group, namely the government, that's where communism comes in, that needs to control and distribute all those things. Well, all of a sudden we're undermining God's gifts to us and the responsibility given to us to be good stewards of things.
It's not thought out very well. I mean, you see roadblocks all the way through the whole concept. You know?
If you're a Christian,
yeah.
or even
even common sense would tell you if you take care of all the haves, got rid of them all, all of a sudden you're the have. So,
Right.
I mean, so who gets rid of you? So
Yeah.
I mean, it's not thought out very far past the first step.
Well,
Correct.
they just take the haves and move them over to
Well, I understand that.
this group of haves.
No, they
Because
want
they
you.
never have the not.
It's always come
Yeah.
down, not go up. I understand that,
Mhm.
but you
Yeah,
know,
but you're right. There's this continual cycle.
yeah,
of,
it doesn't even make
and
really common sense, dude.
yeah, and George Orwell,
Yeah.
talks about this in Animal Farm.
Right.
That and
I
kind
can
of-
think back, but yeah.
he kind of takes it to an extreme, but it's not out of the question. And yeah, it eventually those ones that assume the power, well, then they're looked at it. In some regards, they're looked at as heroes, and so they can maintain their power, even though now all of a sudden they're the haves, and everybody else is still suffering.
Right,
So
right.
that's what
Not to
ends
get
up.
you off your point.
Yeah, but no, but that's
It's
it.
just, yeah.
And we see that is not, that in that regard, that completely against the biblical concepts of charity,
Right.
of how we're supposed to love and treat
Sure.
other people, and that, and again, that God entrusts blessings to each of us individually, that they're not for us to
Right, they're not just ours.
right, they're for us to
Right.
love and serve our neighbor. We
Right.
think about that's if we sum up what is our responsibility as Christians, two greatest commandments. So what is it we're supposed to do as Christians?
Love God beyond all things and love your neighbors as yourself.
Right.
That's
Okay.
the only two, really.
Yeah, and that's it.
If
And
we would do that, everything would be great.
well,
It's not gonna
Yeah,
ever happen.
yeah. no, and
Well,
that's-
it will in heaven. Yeah.
Exactly, it will in heaven, and that's exactly.
Yeah.
And when we think about, we've heard Revelation readings the past 5-6 weeks. That's really what's going on. If you could actually sum all it up to say, here's a perfect picture of what it looks like to love God and to love your neighbor, because there will be gathered around the throne, worshiping God, and then in whatever other things that we're doing in heaven, and at the resurrection, it will be in perfectly loving harmony with our brothers and sisters there. So that is a different, because that's an eternal goal, and that's when Christ returns and takes care of all the sin that separates us from each other right now. That's a very different concept than what they're going for. Marxists with utopia, theirs is a
Tyranny.
well, yeah, it ends up being tyranny.
That's all that is, because either you listen to God and try to live your life the best you can, or you'll do this. Because once you lose God, then all that's left is tyranny for you to
Yeah.
we're just heading down that's what's happened. If we don't ourselves have the moral and godly attitudes,
Mhm.
when the country loses that's what's gonna happen. Something like that or similar.
Yeah.
That's the only way you can control people.
Yes. Well, and I would say that actually gets, this is a little different, but they're closely related.
Yes.
This gets more into like nihilism, where it is, if I don't have any moral grounding, this is strange, but there is a moral grounding here. It's they created it within themselves, but they have somewhat of a code. Whereas nihilism is basically, there's nothing. The quote that the reason why the question why lacks an answer is kind of how nihilism is.
Never heard of
Yeah, but that's where it gets into. Well, I'm going to be the moral code, and I'm going to come up with it, and the best way to do it is to inflict my will upon people, and that's where you get into Nietzsche, and he talks about the Superman, the Übermensch, and that he rises to power, and he is able to shape and mold the herd, which is everybody else is just kind of floundering, going, well, I don't know why we're here, and he gives them purpose and stuff. We see that come out, particularly in history, Adolf Hitler. Okay. That's where, and that's where you can also see the difference between, because Hitler and the communists didn't like each other whatsoever. But still, in all of those, what is missing is God, that He is the creator, that He is the provider. Most importantly, He is the redeemer. He's the one that said, I'm going to take sin on me in my Son. And He's the one that promises the best and honestly unimaginable future that lies ahead of us at the resurrection. So, anyway, so this classical Marxism is where this starts. But when classical Marxism didn't really catch fire, go around the world, it happened in certain places. But again, tyranny and that movement and to want to control and power fed into some of those places. But when it didn't take over and didn't replace really capitalism as the existence, there were people that started to question that, going, well, why? Because this seems so good. And again, this is coming from a non-religious, particularly non-Christian perspective, because they're looking at it and going, well, if this is really who man is, this is a good thing. This is the best way we can get along with each other. So there were people that started looking at that going, why didn't this work? And they came to the conclusion that what was happening was not the difference between the conflict or the classes, but the reality is that the ones who were the haves, the ones who were in power, were building the system so that they could maintain power. And in a sense, that's true. You look at communist Russia, that is kind of what happens. But then it also extended beyond simply an economic theory and an economic outcome to look at things culturally itself. And that's where we brought up this gentleman, Antonio Gramsci. He was a disciple of Marx who looked at Marx's system and really kind of broadened it, not simply to a conflict between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, but the haves and the have-nots, but he calls it the oppressors versus the oppressed. And it says, the people didn't rise up because they were a part of a system that would not allow them to. The system itself was rigged against the people. So it wasn't simply the people understood that they could rise up, take power, and redistribute everything, but they were put into a system and kind of controlled in such a way that they wouldn't rise up against it. So it was when I say system, he's talking about all the institutions in that culture and in that society that held them in that place. So his response was, we need to have a long march through the institutions to undo this. The arrangement of powers was the reason that the Marxist revolution did not occur, and that arrangement of powers was due to those who were in charge. That was the cultural hegemony. This is the term that he came up with. Hegemony is leadership or dominance, especially by one country or social group over another. Cultural hegemony is the dominance given to a particular culture. That particular culture keeps the structure and system in place, hence the reason the revolution never took place. So Gramsci was kind of looking through and seeing all of this and explaining why this didn't happen. But he wasn't just explaining it as kind of this is a neat observation. No, he was explaining it and coming up with this to try to motivate and bring about this change. So the solution was yes, ma'am.
Sitting here and listening, the only thing I can think of that you haven't brought up is how the education of the people. you have bourgeoisie, who are
Mhm.
educated. I don't know how far back you're looking. I can just register what's going, the Russian Revolution. You had the Russian aristocracy. They all spoke French.
Mhm.
Most of them couldn't even speak Russian.
Mhm.
And then you had the serfs who didn't have anything,
Mhm.
but they still had to pay.
Mhm.
So, you know, when you have that type of education has a lot to do with it as well.
Yes, and that's actually what they pick up on. That's what That's when I say Gramsci talked about the long march through the institutions. That was part of it, because if I can control the education,
Mm-hmm.
then I can control and keep the people
Right.
where they are. If I tell the serfs, you guys are serfs because that's just who you are,
That's exactly.
and I teach you that and I control you in that regard, that's going to keep them from rising up. Gramsci realized that, and others. The Frankfurt School is
He
another.
didn't want the violent part, right?
Well, so that's where it broadens to that point where it's not. It doesn't have to be a
Right,
violent
if
revolution.
I teach it through the institutions,
Exactly.
I don't have to protest.
Yes, exactly. If I
don't see
put
that
my
much has
people,
changed over the years.
what's that?
I said, I don't see that much has changed over the years. It's gonna have to start talking
Well, there's a lot of
education.
things that changed. though.
Yeah, but they're still
Mm-hmm.
holding you way down.
Oh, yeah.
Or even Abraham Lincoln, like with slavery, hold him way down, but he wanted to lift him up. I mean,
Yeah.
to me, it's very repetitive. Even under a different name or different view or a
Different
new set
leader.
of rose glasses.
Yeah.
But it's all just history and repeating,
Mhm.
trying to either make it better, classical Marxism.
Right, and that's really so. Going back to Marx himself, that's how he viewed history. That it's these cycles of
Yeah.
conflict, and that eventually it produces a better. But then there's going to be conflict with that, and then that produces a better thing. That goes back to his predecessor Hegel, who had this philosophy of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So you have one thing over here, an opposition to it. They would come together and create this new, better thing. And so,
Sorry,
no,
it's okay.
and so that's that was the cycle that goes on, and that's what Marx is trying to. That's really what he's trying to push along. Is the only way we're going to move forward is to recognize these classes, these conflicts, put them together, and then we'll get to utopia for a time until the next group rise up and set.
I need
And
to look at that hypothesis again.
what's that?
Because it never, I don't think they ever get to where, of course, they
Well,
have
no,
never
it's
got
not
to where they wanna go, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is when you
Yeah.
come back, when it didn't work, then you have to
Right.
review that and you have to rewrite it
Yeah.
and try it again.
Right.
Right, it'll
And-
never work because God put the plan in.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We're
I
not
was just
following
gonna
the
Exactly.
say
plan.
that. I was just
Exactly.
gonna
That's-
say,
that's-
Because it's
You
not
keep
God's
trying to go
plan.
around God's plan, you're gonna keep hitting stuff. That's
Yes,
the way it is.
exactly, and that's
Yeah.
part of the issue. But
Right.
they aren't
But
thinking
man
from
knows best. So.
correct, and that's
see that.
but that's where their start point is that we can understand this and we can do this. But yeah, it doesn't, and that's the other side of it. It doesn't account for God, and it doesn't account for man's sin. How man is able, the capacity for evil that we have.
Capacity for
It'll
you.
send you
Yeah.
to,
What's that?
I said it's gonna send you to the psych ward, just trying to think it all out.
Yes.
You know, I mean, seriously,
Yeah.
you
And,
get to
and
the edge and you can't figure it out.
correct, and that's to go back to nihilism. That's where nihilism leads. Ultimately, is that you're either well, and this takes it even a step further. There's a philosophy called Absurdism, which was really the only question you have to answer in your life is why should I not kill myself? Like that's the philosophy, and I can't remember the guy's name.
He died.
Who's
Killed his
but he
mother.
was because he writes about the myth of Sisyphus, which is the guy who rolls the rock up the hill and then it rolls back down and he can never get it up on it, and that's just I can't
I
remember.
can't think of it either, I should know it,
But
it doesn't.
anyways, so yeah, and that's but all of that is where it is leading. And again, if we go back to the very beginning of this class, what we were talking about, it's really what we're setting over against each other are the wisdom of Christ the philosophy of Christ, and the wisdom of the world. And the wisdom of the world, when you press on it hard enough, is going to leave you in that despair, because it comes down to, I have to find value in myself. I have to make my life worth something. And if I actually ask myself those questions, well, the absurdism comes in and it says, yeah, why is my life worth living? Well, as Christians, we have
We have purpose.
perfect, yeah, well, we have an answer for that. He said, your life is worth living because God gave it to you. Your life is worth living because God redeemed it. And your life is worth living because God promises a future that is, beyond anything you can imagine right now.
If
So
you can't comprehend that, if you haven't been taught that, then
exactly,
Yeah.
and
there we
that's
go again.
That's it.
and that's
That rock rolls right back down the hill, right?
exactly, and that's also why. And this is, we're getting into a totally different topic here, but it's worth saying. But that's also why when we think about church and a life together as a church, that it has to be seen as something different. That's why worship is so odd looking compared to the rest of the world, because it is a reminder that we are not like the rest of the world. We have a hope, a future, a promise of those things that lie ahead. And that's
They have a future, they have nothing.
correct. All they have is right here,
Right here.
right now.
Yeah, and they think
And-
that once this is over, that's it.
Yeah.
Well, they're sadly mistaken.
It's
Right.
And it's not
phenomenal
only
to
that, it's
talk to
that
people like that.
people who, I'm sorry, I didn't mean
Well,
to-
it's okay.
people who, let's say, want to become a Christian, and they look at what's expected of them. If they've had this kind of life, and all of a sudden Jesus is saying, no, you can't do this. How are you going to fit in with your friends?
Mhm.
Because you're completely different now, and you're going to be razzed.
Yep.
And so, they don't want to be out of the mainstream. They want to be with their buds and do what they want to do.
Mhm.
Christian, we have rules that God has set up for us to make us who we are. And a lot of people don't want to change. They don't. They do not want.
Or they want both pots.
They do
Yeah,
want-
and you
I
can't.
do
want
wanna
one
change.
foot in each pot.
Yes.
I want
And
the
you
Lord in
can't.
both
And
pots.
you can't.
And
Yeah.
there's oh man, we don't have enough time
I'm
to
sorry.
go into
I
that.
didn't
No,
mean
it's,
to
no,
bring
it's
that
up.
but it's
Yeah.
but it is a so. Well, the thing we can't do is say you have to change in order to be a Christian, or you have to change in order to be saved.
God changes you,
God changes you,
not you.
and
You can
Right.
you can do things, but
Right.
you'll be running yourself ragged, always trying to be enough, do
Yeah.
enough.
well, and this is the reason we change. So if I'm a drug abuser, or if I'm a drug abuser, we'll use that. That's fine. And I become a Christian. It doesn't mean that if I go back to abusing drugs that I'm no longer a Christian. Not at that point. But what it will do is it will hurt the Christian witness, particularly the neighbors that I'm supposed to love, to serve. Because if I'm continuing in my habit, drug addiction, and that's causing broken relationships, and it's and then I'm no longer being a good steward of whatever. If I die, that doesn't mean I'm not going to heaven. But what it does mean is in this realm, this life, I am hurting the witness of the church, and and that has lasting effects. When we think about how many children and grandchildren are no longer in the church, not because because the message, how many are not in the church because of the witness of the church has been damaged? How many people left the Catholic Church because the priest, they found out scandals with the priest?
Now we got the Baptists
yeah.
in the middle of a mess.
Yeah, yes, the SBC with the sexual harassment and
Improprieties.
yeah, and then
They had the Methodist Church.
What's that?
Add the Methodist Church to it.
Well, yeah,
I mean, it
which
just
is another,
goes on, it just
yeah.
expands.
And then, or you could the televangelist back in the
Well,
80s.
what they'll say is, you're a Christian, you're just as bad as we are. And what are you doing? You know, why are you going and do that? Why are you spending money? Why do you even, because you don't act any different than I am.
Mhm.
You know, so we're led, God gives us the want to,
Mhm.
I call it, to be like him, to try to be like him, to be different. And when we say love your neighbors as yourself, we do it, but some people love them the wrong way.
Well,
You know,
that's
I
true.
mean, they take it sexually, they take
Yeah.
it,
Well,
and so what that does is, those people see that and they say, oh, why do I wanna be a Christian? Because, you know, what
Yeah.
is there in it for me?
Right.
which is true. And this Sunday's gospel reading, I'm not really. I'm sort of preaching on it, but I'm not. But the section that I'm not really preaching on, Jesus talks about, I will send you the helper. Okay, which he's talking about. Jesus is talking about the Holy Spirit,
Yeah.
and that's one thing that we, not that we forget or whatever, but when Jesus tells us to love and serve our neighbor according to his commands, the 10 Commandments, is that, he isn't just saying figure it out on your own. He's saying, I'm sending you the Holy Spirit to help you do this. And I'm giving you my word, my spoken word, and then the word written down for us, the scriptures of old, and then what the New Testament, the apostles, add to it to really explain everything that's going on. And I'm also giving you the gift of baptism and the gift of the sacrament, and I'm going to put some loser in the pulpit to tell you your sins are forgiven too.
Well,
That's-
saying you love
that's-
somebody.
You call me a loser.
No, I'm just,
He was waiting for
I
somebody
am
to bring
thinking,
that up.
no, I am thinking about others, believe me, not thinking about you.
I hope so.
Well, I still
I
give
was
money, so
wondering.
I guess I think he's pretty
Yeah.
good. But, you know, yeah, I'm thinking of some of those television evangelists.
Yes.
You know, I mean,
Yeah. Well,
they had some doozies in Texas when we lived there.
Oh.
We turned it on just to laugh at this guy. Oh my.
Yeah, but a lot of people believe that stuff and
People.
they get hooked into it,
Yeah.
you know? So, but loving somebody now, how are you gonna love your neighbor when somebody tells you to love somebody? How? So that's gotta mean something
That's-
different than normally what our love is.
so that's actually kind of jumping ahead here, but that's actually the problem with all this that's coming out with cultural Marxism. Okay, and so we'll hold that thought for a second. Okay, so Gramsci comes up with this, along with the Frankfurt School, with some other thinkers this time. Cultural hegemony is the problem. The way to undo this is to change the education system, change, basically propaganda, and make people realize that, set people over against each other. Make them realize there are oppressors and there are oppressed, and really indoctrinate them in this understanding.
Teach division.
Exactly. So that then they'll fight it out, and
You're different.
yeah, and
Touch me again and I'll take care
There
of
you
you.
go.
yeah.
You got it. Oh, no, you're that's right.
Yeah, that's just, you know.
and that this revolution is going to come not necessarily with violent means, but in the ballot box, in the people that get placed
Into office.
into office, into positions of power. And so, and it's literally an indoctrination and a re-education that goes on. So, and the other thing is, we don't want to call this, as Gramsci is moving it, we don't really want to call it cultural Marxism. There's a lot of baggage with that name. So we're going to call it something else. Because we're working to get rid of the oppressors and working on the side of the oppressed in a social situation. So we're going to call it social justice. Justice, okay? So,
You get a gold star for that.
Yeah.
I got it marked down.
Oh, that's right.
What a gal.
All right.
Sheet for
What a
that.
gal.
For us to get there.
So,
Waiting for us to get there.
this is, and again, this term on the surface, it seems like innocuous. It seems almost good. Like, who wouldn't want justice and social? So it makes perfect sense. But there's an irony with this. What justice isn't social?
What?
Actually, God's.
Oh,
Well, okay, that's true.
Okay, well,
That's
that's
the
the
only-
only one I was thinking of. so.
That's the right. So, but everything else, when it comes to justice, it assumes justice itself assumes there's a right and a wrong, and so that there's a standard, and so it has to be, justice is to do the right thing by somebody that means that there's an interaction with parties.
Yeah.
So it is by its definition. This shouldn't be a term. There shouldn't be a modifier. It should just be.
Justice is already social.
Yeah, justice is already social, exactly. And any other modifier that you want to put in here, racial, sexual, political, anything else, it's kind of like,
It
if we're
enforces the division.
well, right, that's where it does work. But it should be, justice is justice. The question is, what's the standard of justice? And we say, well, God's word, God's law. That's what we need to be holding to. Loving your neighbor, loving God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength, loving your neighbor as yourself. And performing things that bring about justice in that regard. But when you start modifying it, yeah, you start creating these other divisions and these special classes and these things that are not really in line with what we would consider biblical justice, God's justice, right? And yeah, but
So they justify all the things that have been happening, let's say, over the last year, as far as the police,
Mhm.
defund them. It's okay for you to go ahead and do pilfer from all the stores, right? Because socially, we need to justify this for you,
mhm.
because you've been oppressed. So we need to lift you up, and if that's the way you wanna do it, well, I guess that seems to be
How you're gonna do
the
it.
way we're doing it these days.
Yeah.
Exactly. It
I
always
mean, there's no law, there's no, if I can even say gospel,
yeah,
there's
there
nothing
is.
that goes, social justice to me is just another cover-up for letting go on what's going on in this country.
exactly. It is a
Or
it is a euphemism. If you guys familiar with that term, you make something sound good. Euphemism. It's a euphemism for that cultural Marxism, for that
Yeah.
intent to
Right.
get people against each other. It's
New labels
based
on
off of
opinions.
these categories. Another kind of definition. I don't remember. I realized when I typed up these notes, I was looking at a bunch of different things, and I didn't cite my sources. So.
Make a note of that.
So social, and I just have this. Maybe I made this up. I don't know. Social
Say
justice. So social justice. Okay. Well, justice is getting what you deserve because of what you have done. Okay. So if I worked, justice is I get paid my wages. If I commit a crime, justice is I am punished for it. So getting what you deserve because of what you have done. Okay. Social justice is getting what you don't deserve because of who you are. Okay. And that's because it only looks at the world as these two groups. Okay. And this is where another concept, and this will come out more with the critical race theory discussion, but I'll bring it up now because this is, I don't know if you guys have seen this term or have heard of it, but it is pervasive in all these discussions. intersectionality. And I think we have talked about this in this. So intersectionality is what it sounds like, where things intersect. And the more, in particular as it ties to this, the more categories that you find yourself being the oppressed in, kind of the more points that you get on this intersectionality scale. And so the more credibility you have, the more value you have in being able to speak. Now, like I said, we'll pick up this more with critical race theory, but what this ends up doing is that now these oppressor versus oppressed, these groups get expanded to, whatever you want. I mean, and it's again going back to the education side of it. This is what people are being taught is, not overtly, but there's a group that has control and there's a group that doesn't. And we need to be on the side of the group that doesn't have control and go against the group that does. Now, fill in the blanks of whatever groups that is. If that is right-handed people versus left-handed people. If that is, men with hair versus men without hair. I would take that side.
You still have hair.
Or more serious, what's that?
I said, you still have hair.
Well,
Get on the right, get in line where you're supposed to be now.
Oppressed, as you think.
all right. And this is actually a legitimate one. Able-bodied versus handicapped or physically limited or something like that. But then, of course, it gets into the bigger and broader categories, which I'll let you guys.
Yeah, race, sex, et cetera.
Exactly.
They're oppressed. They're all playing God, and they all have their own opinions about what justice is instead about what we really should be doing. It's all about them, what they think is the right way to go, or whatever they want to do is what they want to do. They don't have another source.
Yes. So that's where
Sources in
ultimately.
them or in their whatever their new thing is that they're supporting. It's not God. It's all about their own things.
Which is yes, and that is fundamentally the problem is that their source of morality, their thing that guides them, and this is all peoples everywhere.
Yes.
It is not God.
No.
It is not that He is the Creator, that we're accountable to Him, that He is the Redeemer who has saved us from sin, death, and the devil and hell, that He is the one who has promised to come and restore all things. If that isn't our foundation, then we're going to come up with whatever wazoo things we want to.
Well,
In other words,
And
some of the
education. That's what it is.
Yes,
How else are you gonna know unless you're not educated?
exactly. That's
It's
what,
gotta be.
and that's what catechesis is. And this goes back to when I found this out a couple weeks ago. When Lutheran schools, or not school, Lutheran churches were planted back when the Walther and the Saxons came over, the kind of unwritten rule was if you planted a church, you had to plant a school with it, because it was they realized the connection between the life of
bring up the children, and so they. That's
exactly
what God calls you to do.
Exactly. So it was, and that's why Lutheran schools. I mean, they're down now, relative numbers. That's why they were so important back at the time. And I found this out too. Who was the head teacher at the Lutheran school?
Minister.
The pastor. Right. So it was a complete. we are going to teach our children the truth and teach them to be Christians so that one, they know their sins are forgiven, that they're going to heaven. Two, that they can go and be productive in the community for the benefit of the community, and that word of Christ's redemption would go out to all people. So, that was the mindset of it. So, our Lutheran forebears understood the importance of it. Now, I would say, and this is the kind of the critique, they not only wanted to keep their kids Lutheran, they wanted to keep them German. But that's whatever.
Well, the Italians, how that goes.
All right.
I'm so bad today, aren't I?
So, but
There
that's
is some German in you, though, isn't there?
oh, there's a lot.
Okay, that's all I need to know.
I'm probably more German than I am Sicilian. So.
Oh,
Krauts.
Sicilian! Wow!
Yeah.
There's a lot of Germans in the.
Yeah.
I have a German wife.
But that's the reality. It was, and when we think of the terms, okay, listen to the term, indoctrination. Well, what do we call the teachings in the church? Doctrine. So really, that's what was supposed to be happening in the church and in the school and in the life together as a church was indoctrination, understanding the teachings of the scriptures, the Christian faith. But once you get outside of that, there are other forces, evil forces in the world, namely Satan, trying to indoctrinate people other ways. And we see that coming out with these man-centered philosophies and concepts that really ultimately drive division, wedge, setting me against my neighbor instead of uniting me to love my neighbor. And as I said at the beginning of all of this, my biggest problem, and I haven't heard this teased out yet, is that what this type of thinking does is it does not allow me to love my neighbor. It says I have to treat them according to either they're one of these or they're one of these. And honestly, I have to treat myself as I'm one of these or one of these.
I have a question.
I might have an answer.
Good. Okay. What kind of love should we love God with, and what kind of love should we love people with?
Or a whole heart, mind, understand.
Yeah,
but
that's
okay.
not an answer.
Yeah. Well, I'll make you answer the question. Where does God reveal how to love Him and
In the
neighbor?
Bible, of course.
Okay.
That's how He speaks to us.
Right. What specific part? Where He actually?
It's in the New Testament.
Well, it is and it isn't. There's a concise, maybe 10 words that explains what it means to love God and to love our neighbor.
So,
John 3:16.
is it more respect than it is
No.
love?
No. Respect can go in there, but
See, you can follow the rules of the Ten Commandments.
that's
They're
it.
supposed to-
That's it.
Now listen, now
Don't
that's
say
for
anything
our
more.
welfare.
He just said he.
Stop
That's
right
our-
there.
that's
Stop
our
right
welfare.
there.
What's that?
Stop
Stop right there. Stop right there.
Let me explain, let me explain.
Okay, but the answer is the Ten Commandments. Go ahead.
But what's the Ten Commandments for? It's for us to act. We're supposed to emulate God, emulate Jesus.
Mhm.
And the Ten Commandments tells us how to act. But it's for our own good. It's
Yep.
not for God to give us things to do to earn anything. It's for our own good,
Correct.
so things will go good in our life.
Correct.
And we don't do it. We want to do this stuff.
Correct.
Your neighbor's life.
Yeah.
It does teach you how to treat your neighbor.
Yes.
So
It does tell you how to love your neighbor.
But if your
But,
neighbor has the
well,
Ten
I don't know if it
Commandments,
tells you how to
It
love
tells
your
you not to
neighbor.
covet your neighbor. It tells you not to steal from your neighbor.
Well, that
It
would be
tells you
loving
not-
your neighbor if you covered him.
What I was getting at with what Barney is saying
Sorry,
is you're
go ahead.
asking, how do you love your neighbor? Okay.
So
and it's
there must be a name for it, or
Well,
a
no,
certain kind, because you love your wife and you love your children and you love sport. You got different things that you love,
Yeah.
but it's
so
it's a
you,
different day. Is there a term, a certain kind of?
so you're yes, what you're bringing up, we'd have to tease out in different areas. But so let's start first. What are God's actual explicit things that help us understand to love our neighbor? The 10 Commandments. The first 3 commandments are actually there. It's about love. How do I love
Yes,
God?
yes.
Don't have any other gods. Fear, love, trust God
Right.
above all things. Don't take His name in vain. Call upon it all times. Trouble, give praise, pray praise, and give thanks. Third commandment: remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Not necessarily like the Jewish Sabbath, but what it means is that we hear God's word, that we hold it sacred, gladly hear and learn it. Do not despise preaching in His word. So that's how we love God. But that's also in a kind of a weird way. That's also how we love our neighbor, because one, if we're calling upon God, if we have God as our God and we're calling upon Him, pray, praise, give thanks, we can actually pray for our neighbors and for their benefits. And then if we're listening to His word, we are learning what it means to live in that community with each other. And then also, if we're coming to church, that's a witness to the neighbor as well. But then, once you jump into the fourth commandment's kind of actually the bridge between the two, because it's talking about authority, honor your father and your mother. And so it is honor that initial relationship that God has given to you, your parents, that authority figure there, but recognize that God is the one who has placed all authority in power and still orders things by His governance. And so we realize that in the community, we need to honor those who are in authority, pray for them, that they, as we read in Psalm 2, that they actually fear the Lord and they do His bidding. So then, from there, it's explicitly about our neighbors. Don't kill. Well, what does that mean? We shouldn't hurt or harm our neighbor in his physical being, but help and support him in his times of need and take care of him. Okay? Do not commit adultery. What does that mean? We be faithful to our wives.
We don't do them.
I agree
So
but
it's not really loving God and the people because we don't do it.
But are you going to love God and love people perfectly?
No, but I would say you would honor, respect Him, and believe Him.
And fear Him.
Trust
True.
what He's going to do.
Yes, that's
what you can do. That's how you love Him and how you do. It's not doing the 10 Commandments over here. That's for your own benefit. That's not.
right.
So you're going to give God. You're going to emulate Him. You're going to try to be
Right.
like Him.
So-
You're going to believe what He says, no matter what.
Yes. Here's why I'm bringing that up. So if we ask, like, what is God's will for creation? What does He want from all the people that He's created, from the whole world itself?
And to get along and have fellowship with Him.
Okay,
To worship.
which exactly, which and to live as He has designed. And well, what does that design look like? Well, the 10 Commandments are the best summary of that. No other gods, not misuse my name, honor my Sabbath, my rest, honor your father and your mother, do not kill, do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not bear false witness, not covet, 9 and 10, the different things there. That is what, when God created Adam and Eve, they were doing all those things perfectly until sin. But then they broke. So when God says, "Look, I'm going to make my people, my community," here's and he goes more than this, but here's the kind of 10 most important things specific to what it means to be my people. And Jesus picks that up as well, and He actually pushes it farther. He's saying, "You've heard of old, do not murder, but I tell you, if you call your brother a fool in your heart, you're liable to the fires of hell." And what Jesus is doing there is ratcheting it up to say that this law is not something to joke around with, but you actually, if you don't do this, you're going to go to hell. There's another reason for that. Jesus ratchets it up to show us, you guys don't do this, but I do it in your place. Different discussion. However, when it comes to relating to our community, to learning how to love our neighbor, those are the examples. That's the most concise way that it fleshes that out. There's more to it than that, but that's the basic place to start. How do I love my neighbor? I don't kill him. In fact, I help him in his body. So if he needs food, I give him food. If he needs clothing, I give him clothing.
John does that,
He needs clothing.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah, you
That's-
can love it, you bring him some clothes.
You know,
Put it-
John is nicer to him than I have to go away before I say something.
yeah, and so
Put that on Facebook.
Oh, stay away from Facebook. I have nothing
and
to
you
do with
can
Facebook.
and you can go down that list, and that's how we interact with the community. Now, what you're talking about with your wife, your children, and then the community, that's actually vocation, which is it relates to this, but it is in that sense it's the proximity of neighbors. So who is your closest neighbor?
I don't know.
Yes, you do.
No, I don't know.
Yes, you do. She's married to you.
Well, she's not my neighbor.
She is. No, she is. I mean, that's the thing is, she is actually any other human being is a neighbor. That's what Jesus makes that clear.
Oh, okay, I see what you're getting at.
So Kathleen is your closest neighbor. My closest neighbor is Rachel. Okay, then who's your next closest neighbor? So that's the primary relationship that I have of loving and serving my neighbor. That the one that God has given me as my wife, or spouse, husband, in your all's case, that's your primary relationship. Then the next one that comes after that are your children. Okay, they are the next closest neighbor to you. And
Okay, so you have a different kind of love for your wife and a different kind of love for your children.
correct, in a sense that they get prioritized over everything else.
Well, your
So-
wife is supposed to be priority,
Correct.
then
So-
your children.
Correct.
But God is supposed to be first.
Correct. Yeah, but I can't really reach up and give God a hug. Does that
No.
make sense?
I've tried.
Right. I can eat him on a communion, but that's anyway.
Well, it's hard, just trying to say, how.
So that gets into like I'm saying.
There's a name, probably a name for the kind of love we're supposed to have.
Well-
Like there's agape love and there's all.
I mean, yeah.
Is it like a
That's
friend?
kind of weird.
Do we love God like a friend?
Yeah. So our love for God is supposed to be
Is it supposed to be more than that?
It's supposed to be our whole love the Lord your God with
I know,
your
but
whole.
what does that mean? I don't even know.
Well,
You
yeah.
even know what your
You need to
soul
get a
is or your
one-on-one
spirit is?
Yeah, it's anything and everything that's in you. Your whole mind, body, soul, strength, all of that, all of it's supposed to love God. Now, of course, there's a problem with that.
We can't.
Sin. Yeah.
Self.
Yeah. So,
Self.
We
but
want to share. We
But-
want to love ourselves instead of.
exactly. But that when we're thinking about vocation is kind of in a sense prioritizing where our love should go. So my first responsibility is Rachel, and then my 3 children, and then the congregation, because you all are the next closest neighbors that I have, both as fellow Christians, but also particularly because I'm a pastor. And so that's and then from there, the community that we're in, okay? And again, the degrees to which, I'm not saying this isn't my responsibility, but I know this is not within my capability. I can't go around and feed every hungry person that's in my life. But if we get a large group of us together as a congregation, and we can help with that, let's say.
Right.
But that's loving and serving our
Yes.
neighbor in the community.
So,
When God gives the Holy Spirit in baptism and makes a child or an adult his, it's not simply a one and done thing. It is an ongoing life. And if at whatever point that child that becomes an adult, or even that adult, 10 years after, starts thinking, I don't want this
so
anymore.
that would be sanctifying?
So yes, that's what we would call it, is that process of sanctification, of becoming more holy.
Okay.
At whatever point they decided, I just don't believe this anymore, I just don't want to be here anymore, I want to do my own thing.
Not that we're a
That's-
failure then.
Correct.
That's what you want to know.
Yeah. Now,
You didn't fail.
Now, where the failure, and that might, and when I say you're not a failure individually, because you did the right thing, what could be the failure is, and this really comes back on me, and the pastors and the church as a whole, is communicating the importance of what this is. This is when you are baptized. This is what we were talking about. When you are baptized, that is a new identity that's been given to you. You are a new creation. You are not of this world anymore. You are promised everlasting life. And everything that happens between now and the time that your baptism is fulfilled, meaning when you die, is in a sense a rehearsal for that, and also in a sense a celebration of that's where we're going. And so I'm going to live my life free here and now, free to love and serve my neighbor because I know what lies ahead of me. It's also recognizing that if I detach myself from that, if I separate myself from the communion of saints, the holy Christian church, well, I'm going to probably not return to it, and I'm going to be, it doesn't mean they're going to go to hell or anything like that. It could if they outright reject it, but what it does mean is that then their children aren't going to have that exposure, and then their family members and those around them aren't going to have that exposure, and they're going to look and say, well, this son went off and he was in the church, but then he left, and he seems to be doing all right. So maybe I don't need the church either. And that's going to be what happens.
So when a parent doesn't bring their child to baptism, it's not that God doesn't want that child to be baptized, but that person not bringing them is just further downgrading, sinning,
So
perpetuating that
yes,
situation, right?
that person doesn't think baptism does anything
Right.
or is meaningful.
Because the infant can't do. So the parent is bringing them to baptism.
Correct.
And we say God accepts them, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if they're not brought,
Correct.
then that just, I guess, exacerbates the whole issue, right?
Yes, because it's saying
Sure.
that baptism doesn't mean anything.
Right.
Or the reverse, or not the reverse, but the other side of it, we bring them to baptism, but then we don't take them to church
Right.
because they don't.
So which,
Yeah, and it is, they've been given this wonderful, beautiful gift, but they're not being trained in it. This is probably a terrible example, but it was one that I thought of. It's as if I were to give a gun to.
well,
There's got to be
you're
something.
not letting them open it.
Huh?
You're not letting them open the gift. You give them the gift, but they have to keep it wrapped their whole life.
Well, yeah, that's part of it. But I'm even thinking. I give Simeon a bike, okay, and I never teach him how to ride it.
Right.
So it's a wonderful gift to him. He may have opened it up and
No value.
exactly because he doesn't
He doesn't learn the
Right.
value.
right
Right.
and
Teach him.
and learn what this means.
It's the
Not
same with the baptism. You baptism don't bring the church, they don't get the value of the baptism.
exactly. And then when it comes time for, the same goes with communion, because if we actually, and this is, I'm kind of quoting Luther here, if we actually grasped what communion was for us, we would be here every day banging down the door saying, I need this, because we know what it is. Now, but that's our sinful nature. I can't excuse it, but that's just the reality. The same with the kids who get either go through First Communion or get confirmed and then take communion. All of a sudden, it's like, once they hit high school, can't drive or can drive wherever they want, or they go off to college.
Right.
All of a sudden, they don't see Christ's body and blood as that important. It's the same concept. Here's a gift, and they're not using it. And that's hard to combat, but that's also, and again, this is going back to everything that we've been talking about here. There are forces outside the church that are indoctrinating kids to be against that.